As we all know by now, the world of AAA video games is a notoriously hostile, uncertain business. And sometimes, even if a game is a smash, it still may not be enough to save a studio from going under. However, once in a while, a studio will take a risk and colour outside the lines, which will either be met with acclaim and success, think of Resident Evil 4, or the fans will revolt and the title will bomb. Over the years, many promising looking sequels have been announced, tantalizing gamers with cool footage and demos, only to be scrapped before hitting store shelves because the developers or the publisher got cold feet. There are numerous reasons why this happens. Maybe the gameplay isn't working out so they start again, or they decide it's too far removed from formula and go back to something safer. Still, knowing why a promising, cool sequel is rejected outright doesn't make losing them any easier. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 9 perfect video game sequel ideas that were rejected. Number 9, Half-Life 2 Episode 4, Return to Ravenholm. It feels like the announcement of Half-Life 3 will coincide with the actual literal apocalypse at this stage, as it's been nearly a decade since the last episode. But anybody who played Half-Life 2 will no doubt remember Gordon's trip to Ravenholm, where the shooter suddenly switched to being a gripping survival horror game. It's one of the best levels in all of gaming. The whole section is an intense, creepy ride that was a standout chapter, and if things had gone according to plan, a new episode would have revisited that abandoned town. Valve allowed a little studio named Arcade to play in the Half-Life sandbox for a little while, and while they were impressed by their results, they halted what they were working on due to creative concerns. They felt most of the tropes of Ravenholm had been played out, the headcrab zombies, the traps, etc, and it wasn't innovative enough. They probably had a point, but at this stage any new Half-Life would be a great thing, and exploring more of the eerie town sounds like a fun way to spend a few hours. Number 8, Fear Effect Inferno. The Fear Effect games for the PS1 were a stylish mix of action and horror, but the awkward control scheme took away some of the fun and stopped them fulfilling their true potential. Still, they gathered a fanbase that loved the characters, and Eidos initially appeared gung-ho about bringing the series to the PS2. Development began on a new game subtitled Inferno, which would have found the mercenary team being chased by demons once again. An early trailer hinted at a lot of horror elements, with Hannah experiencing nasty hallucinations and being attacked by demonic doctors. At least they weren't dentists, eh? The game would have featured a more user-friendly control scheme while still retaining the cinematic gloss of the 2 previous games. Inferno was coming along nicely until Eidos had a sudden change of heart and decided against finishing it, though it took years before its cancellation was actually confirmed. That looked like the end for the series until a Kickstarter campaign managed to raise the funds for a spin-off title called Fear Effect Sedna, which released in 2018 to less than impressive reviews. Number 7, Prey 2. The original Prey had a messy development, beginning life in 1995 and going through a few cycles before finally being released in 2006. The game became a success and received some nice enough reviews for its unique portal-based gameplay, and the concept seemed ripe for a franchise. A sequel was soon put into motion that starred a new hero, who was a bounty hunter on an alien world, which, as we all know, is the best kind of bounty hunter. The story would have close ties to the original, but would feature an expansive open world to mess around in. The game was announced with a flashy CG trailer that got fans excited, but then the development went quiet and rumors spread about it being scrapped. Those fears were eventually confirmed in 2014 when publisher Bethesda admitted Prey 2 hadn't lived up to their lofty standards. Thankfully, the Prey reboot that followed was admittedly awesome, but it didn't make us entirely forget what a proper sequel could have been. Number 6, Stranglehold 2 Gunrunner. Right, I have been waiting 2 whole years to be able to properly talk about John Woo's Stranglehold on a WhatCulture video because this game is glorious. That this never got a sequel is an actual crime, and the fact that I'm only just now 12 years later finding out that it almost had a sequel has filled me with grief I haven't felt since Scott told me he didn't like L.A. Noire. The original was a brief but addictive action game where you played as Chow Yun-Fat's character from Hard Boiled, and you set about shooting and blowing up large waves of enemies in beautiful slow motion. And the doves, oh my god! There were doves everywhere, it was awesome, it was the most John Woo thing in this entire world, and I loved it to bits. Likewise, the game was also a decent-sized hit, but Midway wanted to broaden the franchise's appeal by bringing in another actor for the sequel. The new game was subtitled Gunrunner, and saw Chow teaming up with Vin Diesel's character from Wheelman, another Midway game. Stranglehold 2 would have focused on them both working together, and environments had gotten so destructible you could level whole buildings if you wanted to, and let's face it, why wouldn't you? There were also driving sections where one player drove while another fired at oncoming enemies, and while early prototypes looked impressive, Midway sadly eventually folded due to financial pressure in 2008. And what a tragedy that actually is. Number 5, The Thing 2. Ash, tell the good people how good the original Thing game actually was. Yeah, it's alright. Take your $5. This is the last time I bribe you for anything, you useless, get out. Alright, just ignore her for a second. The Thing video game for the PS2 was a sequel to John Carpenter's classic movie and followed Captain Blake while he blasted twisted aliens and led NPCs to safety. Despite what you've heard, it was awesome, even if the game could be a damn frustrating experience since it had ambitious features like a trust meter between you and your allies. But the linear story demanded they thing out at certain points no matter what you actually did. Nonetheless, it was a fun game, and more importantly for the developer, it sold well. The sequel would have seen Blake join with MacReady from the movie, fighting their way through a snowy town, an oil rig, and eventually a huge aircraft carrier. The graphics were overhauled and new creatures would have attacked, like a nasty clinger beast that crawled along the ceiling and tried to strangle the player with its intestines. Ew. The early footage looked promising and the new monsters were suitably nightmarish, but sadly the game was scrapped when Computer Artworks closed down. Number 4, Call of Duty Roman Wars. Call of Duty was the coolest thing in the world after Modern Warfare, but the brand got watered down after yearly sequels that were basically the same game with some cosmetic twists and more microtransactions. The series needed to cut loose and experiment again, and for a brief period it flirted with trying something completely different with Call of Duty Roman Wars. Like the title implies, it followed a Roman legion through various battles and was viewed from both a first and third person perspective. The player would be involved in all sorts of major battles and shenanigans, including sieges, commanding ships, and even fighting one-on-one in the Colosseum. The game's idea of vehicle sections would let you control an elephant and rampage around a battlefield, stomping the enemy. This pitch was apparently well received within Activision, but it was rejected for the same reason they liked it. It was just too different. The developers, Sledgehammer, went on to create Advanced Warfare instead, which is the very definition of playing it safe. Number 3, Resident Evil 5. Just like Resident Evil 2 and 4 before it, the 5th game in the series underwent a painful birth before release. It started life as a single-player experience, where Chris Redfield was dropped into Africa to track down Wesker, and he had to deal with fast-moving zombies and all kinds of nasty new creatures. The plot for this version was different as well, with Chris visiting completely different locations like an abandoned tanker and a village crawling with lickers. Sheva was a supporting character who helped him occasionally, Barry Burton showed up during a major set piece to lend support, and the merchant from Resident Evil 4 returned to sell the player's weapons. It had the makings of another intense solo experience, but apparently Capcom got cold feet after a backlash started to set in and co-op games were starting to be viewed as the future. As a result, the story was rewritten and the focus instead shifted to co-op, with Sheva being promoted to co-lead. It's still a decent game, but it removed the series even further from its roots, and the co-op element still feels a little bit gimmicky to this day. Number 2, Silent Hills. Oh, I promised myself that I'd never allow myself to relive the pain of Silent Hills, but here we are. Silent Hills is maybe the most heartbreaking video game cancellation of all time. It had a groundbreaking demo that fans are still raving about to this day, it would have reinvented a flagging series, and it paired two geniuses together with Guillermo del Toro and Hideo Kojima both on board to develop ideas. It was practically an excuse to print cash money. The reasons behind its cancellation remain murky, as does the Kojima-Konami breakup in general, but based on PT alone, it could have been a landmark game in survival horror. Little is known about the story itself, other than that it would have featured Norman Reedus in the lead, and the teaser drops various hints about a murdered family and a ghost named Lisa chasing the player. PT was still just a teaser, so we have no idea of the treats that awaited us in the actual main game. The sequel had so much potential, and the worst thing is that the odds of it being resurrected are 0. It doesn't even matter if the next Silent Hill game is great, it can never live up to the hype behind PT. Number 1, Legacy of Kain, Dead Son. There hasn't been a new installment in the Legacy of Kain series since 2003's Defiance, and yes, let's just ignore Nosgoth for a second, which ended on a huge cliffhanger. A direct sequel titled The Dark Prophecy was in development shortly after, but was quickly canned when Defiance failed to become a bestseller. For years, there was no news on another game, until it was revealed in 2013 that a new title had been in development, but it was binned after a chunk of work had been completed. The game, titled Dark Sun, featured a new hero named KAIN, whose soul becomes bound with a human he was hired to murder named Asher. This bickering double act set out to avenge Asher's murdered wife, and KAIN Asher had lots of new abilities to mess around with, including an Arkham Asylum-like fighting system. The game had gotten as far as motion capturing actors and voice recording, but apparently sales projections for Dead Son weren't so hot, so the studio pulled the plug. And this, as Scott Tailford will tell you, is a crying shame, because Legacy of Kain has such a rich story and it's just begging for a new entry, and Dead Son brought a lot of cool ideas to the table. So that's our list. Answer what you guys think down in the comments below. Would you have enjoyed seeing any of these games see the light of day? And are you as big a Stranglehold fan as I am? Either way, while you're there, could you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.